Good afternoon. Welcome to Sundays at 2. Thank you all for being here. It's not sunny out, so maybe this is a good day to come. There's a restroom in the back if you need that, and we'll do cookies and coffee when we're done, or when the speaker's done. So thank you for being here. Today's event, I'm really honored to introduce Josh Sherbin, who's with us from Michigan. We invited him to come south so he could be a little bit warmer. This is probably an aspect of the electric vehicle industry that I didn't think a lot about, and I'm sure most of us don't and did, only become focused on it perhaps during the pandemic when everybody started ordering for local delivery and he became a lot more aware of local delivery networks and so forth. But Josh has agreed to come and talk to us about what the Shift Group is doing in this area. They're a leading innovator in the area of specialty vehicles in the United States, and they're a U.S. manufacturer, U.S. design, U.S. engineering. And I think you'll find it intriguing what this sector of the electric vehicle industry is doing and what it might mean for those of us who have to consider whether we'll put one in our own garage at some point in time. So Josh, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Pat. Good afternoon. And I'm Josh Sherbin, and I'm really thrilled to join you today. And I agree with Pat's comment in terms of coming from beautiful Michigan where there still is fresh snow on the ground. And it's pretty delightful coming here and seeing trees in bloom. And I even thought I saw crocuses coming up, which was also pretty exciting. I'm interested in terms of, so as Pat mentioned, we'll talk about electrification with a focus on a particular slice, and that's the commercial fleet industry, which is a little bit different. I can't say I could answer a lot of intelligent questions about passenger cars. I'll do my very best as we get into questions and such to talk about electrification in trucks, but it really is a slightly different element in terms of what's happening in the electrification world. Lots of similar issues, but probably in terms of lots of focus on what's Tesla's technology and what's coming out next in terms of electric sedans. I probably don't have a lot of good insights. I am interested, though, in terms of just by a show of hands. I had lunch with Pat and some of the folks who were working on the committee to put this together, and found that out of the 4 others at the table, 3 of them had hybrids. So does, in this room, who has either an EV or a hybrid? Okay, so I think we're somewhere at about the 3%, or maybe 10%. It's interesting. I have we have 2 cars. One's electric, and in terms of in suburban Detroit, and even today, driving from suburban Detroit to say northern Michigan, there is one place to charge, and a topic we'll touch on today, even as it relates to trucking. But it's interesting when you think about the challenge in terms of where we are today and how much bandwidth and how much is devoted to coverage of electrification and electric vehicles, that is still where things are from a charging perspective. Very interesting comment just again about lunch today. The hybrid side, you do have the benefit of both having gas and as an element of your power, as well as, of course, the electrification maybe for shorter haul. So let me start off, and I'll tell you just quickly about me. And I have been at the Shift Group for 2 years. I've been a lawyer for roughly 35 years, and in manufacturing for 25 of those years, in terms of being in settings where we manufacture. What is really translated in terms of my job, I think of it as a couple different things. I think of it as it's really helping to solve business issues. Everything's a legal problem when it comes, but it's not really a legal problem. It's solving a business issue. It's understanding risk, of which there's lots in the electrification space. It's understanding regulations, and frankly, it's helping us get product out the door in lots of different ways. So it's maybe a little bit different than a traditional legal role, but in that role, that's what it translates to. What we'll talk about today is I like to sort of think about this as starting from the prospect of the Shift Group, but really as part of the storyline. In terms of thinking about electrification and thinking about it within the commercial vehicle space. using Shift as sort of an example of what's happening. There's lots of other really exciting things happening in terms of in other arenas. We'll touch on lots of themes here in terms of what's driving electrification, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. But I'm gonna, without actually trying to sell you a truck, there will be some videos in here of pretty exciting product. And it's from the standpoint of really, I think it's easier to look at the product and understand it in terms of what's happening in this arena generally. So let me stop. Go back, sorry. So what is Shift? Shift, as Pat already said, is a manufacturer of specialty vehicles. And in terms of if you want to think about where do you see our product, I'm willing to bet the Amazon delivery van that pulled up to your house not too long ago, the DHL truck, the UPS truck, the USPS truck, would all be examples, and I can't guarantee every one of them that came to your house or up your street is one we made, but there's a pretty good chance that at least one of them was. And then you'd also see them in lots of other applications. You'd see them with, for example, Perlator, which is in logistics, that has a large Canadian presence. You'd see it in lots of vocational applications. If you pulled up to a work site and there was a truck that had capacity for lots of storage on the side and maybe another contraption on the top for lifting, or if it had other applications like a rack across the back that was holding tools, we also made that body, and that's called those are service bodies. What we actually do is we acquire the chassis, the underneath portion, from a GM, from a Ford, from a Stellantis, and we build the box on top of it, so which is called upfitting. That's one part of the business. We do some other things as well, and as we'll talk, we spend a lot of time developing electric vehicles. Today, Shift is about $1 billion business, so in the world of public companies, we're a small public company. We have roughly 4,200 employees. We're in 16 manufacturing locations across the United States, and we touch about within a several-hour drive about 85% of the U.S. population, which is important in the trucking business and manufacturing rather specialty vehicles like this, because you don't want to have to transport them a long way after they're built. Customers want them close by. It's interestingly a very regional kind of business. So, looking across Shift today, we're a collection of 9 brands, and these brands are probably, unless you're in the commercial vehicle space, they're probably not household names. Some of them are well known within the space. Utilimaster has been around for 50 years as of this year, and manufactures the product that we were talking about earlier, the various walk-in delivery vans. One that we'll talk a lot about today, which is particularly interesting, is Blue Arc. And in our world, we created Blue Arc 2 years ago to really create this portfolio of electrified products. And portfolio meant, first, instead of going out and buying a chassis, like I mentioned that we do with Amazon or we do with DHL, we saw that there were other electric chassis in the market, but frankly, they weren't doing a very good job. And you hear about lots of excitement about, and I'm not going to disparage competitors, but products that are out there that really, frankly, are selling, but are coming back with lots of quality problems. So we developed our own chassis, and we redesigned the same body we put on that Amazon delivery van. We redesigned it for electrification in terms of what are the things you worry about when you have an electrified product. You might not worry about with a gas product. You worry a lot more about weight because a battery has to have the durability to be able to go further in terms of range. So those are a couple of products. One other product that's interesting that we make, we had a conversation at lunch today about one of our colleagues at lunch has an RV. We manufacture the RV chassis on high-end RVs. That is also a product that we manufacture in-house. So with that, we've been in the business for about 47 years. We actually were created in the mid-70s by a group of engineers who were interested in, saw a market opportunity to go out and buy chassis and upfit them with these various service bodies. We went public in the 80s and have been doing the same thing for a very long time. We're not in any way new to the world of alternative propulsion, and in that space you think of hydrogen, you think of electrification, you think of hybrids. We've been in each of those spaces for about the past 20 years and have worked on electric vehicles for about 10 years. And in that space, really, when we think of what differentiates us as a company, is that while others are new and they sort of are able to put up a neat PowerPoint in terms of we're going to make electric trucks, they've actually never built a truck. They look at it from the standpoint of great market opportunity, but have never built a truck. We're able to bring this kind of background, which was really a leg up in terms of capacity. So with that, enough of the world of Shift, enough of how we got to where we are and why I'm actually standing in front of you. Let's talk about some of the things that actually are really within the electrification space today as it relates to commercial vehicles. So we'll chat about the current state, we'll talk about some challenges and opportunities, and then, of course, looking at what's the future. What's interesting is when you think of the current state right now, you have roughly last year about just under 2 million Class 1 through Class 8 trucks. Class 1, think of vans. Class 8, think of long-haul heavy trucks. About 1 million, just under 2 million of those, about 1.8 million, came on the market last year as new vehicles. In that whole space, 42,000 approximately were electrified, fully electrified. So it's amazing how small the actual universe we're talking about is and how much attention it's getting. And I think for lots of great reasons, and we'll talk about that. But if you think about current space, what is that current state rather? We're looking at a space that is really sort of at a nascent state of growth. There still is no question when we went back and talked about Shift and we talked about $1 billion in revenue, our revenue base is traditional, what you would call ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine, gas and diesel. So let's talk about current state a little bit further. What is really the driver here? Hands down, the biggest driver is the fact of focus on climate change, focus on environmental considerations, and the role that the transportation industry plays in that. So if you look at this and see that 30% of the transportation sector is responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. And within that, let's focus on medium duty, which is the walk-in vans, delivery vans we were talking about, that are the large blue vans of one e-commerce retailer, or the brown van of another large e-commerce retailer, and then heavier trucks, larger trucks. Of those two areas, what you'd call medium and heavy duty, that's responsible for about 25% of that 30%. So you really see, in terms of opportunity to make an impact on greenhouse gas emissions, is largely related to what kind of impact can we make in electrifying the commercial vehicle area, and particularly in the medium and the heavy duty side. So that is a huge driver. This, if you look in the past and think about other sort of focus on electrification, focus on hybrids, for example, probably a lot to do with, certainly there's focus on environmental, but there's also focus on gas prices as a big driver in terms of sort of some of the gas spikes of the past, say, several decades that gave rise to hybrids coming along. I think now, well, certainly gas and volatility of gas price could be related to this as well. Big component of it is the fact that climate change and the focus that is occurring really across a whole array of stakeholders. Yes, it's people who are concerned as consumers about environmentalism, but it's investors who demand from companies that manufacture that we take a step in the right direction. It's management of these companies that also are committed to, we have a responsibility from a greener future to moving in this direction. And of course, it's the government that has looked at issues, and while there could be lots of sort of political turmoil, or even, I imagine, a scientific conversation about climate change, in terms of focus, there really is huge government commitment at both the federal and state level to addressing this issue. So that's probably, if you look at current state, a very significant driver. Let's talk about some of the growth drivers. And so looking at, say, today, or a few years ago, 2020, and thinking 2030, what are some of the things that are going to drive and are driving the EV growth arena generally? So on the policy mandate side, pretty interesting again, we were talking at lunch. I'm glad we had lunch. We got to talk about a lot of topics. But on the policy mandate side, California, for example, has said that by 2035, only EV vehicles can be sold in the state of California. Policy mandate. Interestingly, in Virginia, I saw last summer, there was a commitment by a law passed that said a EV vehicle would be essentially the vehicle of choice purchase if, from a commercial perspective, it was a viable alternative. Policy mandate. I think you see those examples. You see lots of other examples similar to that in terms of, say, California usually setting the pace with regard to things like clean air, and other states that decide whether or not to follow suit. Similarly, on the policy side, federal government has made it very clear in terms of at least ambition by 2030 that half the federal fleet will be electrified, or at least new purchases will be electrified. So lots of initiative that's driving this from the government side. On the corporate ESG, ESG, fancy acronym you've probably come across or know well, and that's environmental, social, and governance. And in terms of tied to corporate, because it is impossible in corporate America today to not have ESG come up in any conversation about what are your priorities. And that's priority from a board perspective, priority from a management perspective, and ESG, at least as we're talking today, really is from the environmental front. And that's what are you doing to really make tomorrow greener? And that might be, what are you doing to lower your carbon footprint? What are you doing to become net zero towards emissions? What are you doing to lower greenhouse gases? And then it goes beyond that. It's recycling. It's effective use of utilities. It's effective use or limited use of water. It's higher degree of recyclability in your product. So all of this that ties into, again, driver. And I put both of these, you'll see, on the high growth side. Because in the policy side, no question, there is tremendous focus today on driving those government initiatives as influencing what is driving electrification to the headlines day to day, even though, at least on the commercial truck side, as we said, there's a relatively low presence. On the ESG side, high driver, because there's no choice at this point for manufacturers and others in this space other than to get on the horse and be very active in terms of helping to drive change. Another, total cost of ownership. One of the things that I was asked around the room, you might say, about buying a EV passenger car is it's probably expensive, more expensive than buying a regular car. And in most cases, I think you'd be right. That's starting to change. On the passenger car side, you saw some interesting sort of price battles with Tesla lowering their price, Ford lowering their price on their Mach-E 1. On the truck side, as we'll look at a little bit later, there's no question that initial downstroke to buy a walk-in van, commercial 4 or 5 truck that's going to be, again, we're going to pick on Amazon. For that Amazon truck, it's going to be roughly, probably anywhere from 2 to 3 times the price. Now, that's the initial cost of the truck itself. What's driving that in large part? The battery prices are still a hefty price of ownership. And the fact that obviously there's a lot of cost involved today of companies have invested from an R&D perspective. So there's some of that cost involved. So total cost of ownership, while today is not necessarily a powerful driver, it's looking at the long-term cost, meaning what I paid today to go and get that truck, that's expensive. What it's going to cost me over the life of the truck, let's say 10 years, and we'll look at that, then you start to see not only parity, you start to see enormous benefit in electrified commercial vehicles. I think as prices come down on price of purchase over time, you'll see that this will be a much higher growth driver as well. So those are some of the things that you think about. How is this market under such sort of dynamism in terms of change? That's one of the reasons. So where are some markets for adoption? We talked about e-commerce. We talked about logistics, trucking at all levels. Certainly you see lesser adoption today on the large trucks that are going for long haul or even short haul than you see in the walk-in van space, like the e-commerce vehicles that are showing up at our homes and dropping off parcels. Another great example of adoption is buses, both municipal and you're seeing school bus electric adoption. And what's interesting here is there's certainly a similarity there, and it's in the green text right at the top. And these are consistent shorter routes. Because frankly, you can't stop and gas up, so to speak, at the corner gas station with your walk-in van that happens to be electric or your electric bus. You need to go in today, back to the depot, recharge, and then go out on that same route. Those typically are probably routes that are going to run, say, 100 to 200 miles a day, be relatively repeat oriented, and you're going back to that depot at night to charge up. So there's where some key markets for adoption. I think it's fair to say that EV is reaching somewhat of an inflection point. We talked about the share of EV sales as a percent of total vehicle sales. Today, very small. On the other hand, if numbers that I saw over the past week in terms of what's happening with EV truck production sales over the next year, expected to increase by about 300%. So this is not in any way, it's not sort of stagnating, it's picking up pace at a really impressive pace. That's overall across all classes. And then when you think about this in terms of projection, you continue to see this kind of continuous growth, probably not at that alarming rate, but at tremendous rates that will continue to pick up, largely for reasons that, for example, it's becoming increasingly attractive. Government incentives, as of the past year, are playing an enormous role in the truck space in terms of why people who previously would not have considered, fleets that would not have considered buying a EV and said it was cheaper to buy a gas truck, now see the fact that the government's helping that purchase go forward, willing to consider it. EV models are being made available. If you went to, and I get to go to all the exciting places, I was at the National Truck Show in Indianapolis earlier this week. If you were there 2 years ago, there were probably a handful of EV manufacturers, and the booths kind of looked like science projects. If you were there this year, it is a really slick, impressive production. And that's in 2 short years of the number of players that have entered the market. Those who had a good idea but didn't have the capacity to manufacture, you're starting to see them fall out. And you could have seen that news as recently as this past week. And you're seeing instead manufacturing companies that really are putting significant resources and product that's actually on the road. Battery prices, as we talked before, and I talked about general price of product, battery prices are a huge component of EVs generally. To some extent, and this is probably could run all ways, but largely falling battery prices. And that's as technology improves, that's as additional players come into the marketplace that are able to provide batteries. And if you've ever seen an EV car battery, it doesn't look like the battery that's in your gas or a diesel car today. It is a really impressive piece in a truck space, probably 3 feet by 4 feet, and it has a number of cells in a sealed body. So it's a pretty impressive piece of machinery, and falling battery prices, again, helping on the adoption side. So now if you look at that and think about what does that mean in the marketplace, and to those that are using these vehicles, and what are they driving? I'm not going to read all these to you, but to pick on one or two, FedEx to have its pickup and delivery, reference there is PUD, all electric by 2040. Amazon, carbon neutral by 2040. You only get there as these companies by obviously electrifying your fleet. You can't have gas and diesel on the road entirely and be carbon neutral. Now there's other ways to sort of reduce your carbon footprint that will allow them to have some presence in the carbon space, but this is a really strong statement by probably some of the largest fleet operators in the country as to what are they going to do in terms of changing the electrification business. We talked about green mandates. Customers looking for an OEM purpose-built chassis. That's a bit of a shift message in terms of how did we decide to get into this space. As I mentioned just a bit ago, in terms of deciding that there wasn't really a product in the space that met customers' needs. There were manufacturers that were putting a product out there that was essentially a gas chassis that they had taken out some of the parts and put batteries in, so to speak. But this is a different approach. Huge reference or a huge number there at 16 billion in terms of the total addressable market. That means what's the opportunity? It's a little hard to stay away from a space where there's $16 billion of sales opportunity in the size trucks that we're talking about. And then a pretty impressive statement that at least projections that by 2040, 50% of the light medium duty vehicles will be EV. Now, all of these numbers are interesting. I would tell you that depending on where you read, you're going to see variance in terms of what the source is. These are, I think, from pretty reliable sources, but I'll warn you and say that depending on what you read, where you look, you'll see some variation. I wanted, while we're talking here, just for a moment, and let that video run in the background. What did we do in terms of deciding to design this EV in the shift space? We did, obviously, in the same way we manufacture gas and diesel trucks, go out and talk to customers and understand what are your needs, as opposed to sort of putting in their driveway, so to speak, what we believed was the right product. It was listening to the customer, understanding, designing around, frankly, seeing others' errors, and moving forward with what was a customer solution. It's funny, it's something as simple as a shelf support and making sure that the shelf support has hollow brackets, because that's an easy way to take weight out. It's something as simple as knowing what is the height of the step as you walk out of a FedEx delivery van. Believe it or not, there are entrants in this space that designed on their own a height of that FedEx step without understanding what was most ergonomically really accessible or at least beneficial to the driver. So that's the approach there. What we did is, and I'll let this run in the background, that is when we presented last year the truck at then the National Truck Show, and really for the first time unveiled what our electric proprietary chassis and proprietary vehicle looked like. This was in a span of about from May of 21 to March of 22. So less than a year, that in the world of vehicle design, that's meteoric speed. And really exciting, very well received. We are today, as we've said to the market, we do not yet have one of these on the road in terms of for sale. We've been interfacing with dealers, with end user customers. We were able to announce that we had a pre-sale, an order of 2,000 units, which is a really nice, significant order, and expect to start manufacturing here in the latter half of this year. So it's a path in terms of going from developing and actually how do you get that vehicle into production. There it is, and it's sort of as a finished unit, and there are several of these that exist in terms of proof of concept, as it's called, as you're developing a product. And if you looked at that and said, so what's the big deal? What's interesting and unique about that? You'd see great attentiveness to safety lighting in the back. You'd see, although hard to see in that picture, a 360-degree camera, sort of from a comfort and safety perspective for drivers. And then, of course, as we'll look in a slide or two, in terms of the capability of that is on one charge to go 200 miles. And that is in the world of, as we talked earlier about range, a really important factor. I'm going to point out a really cool product that we've also brought along the way, and it's sitting next to that truck. One of the things we talked about is that I have one place to charge when I drive from southeast Michigan to northern Michigan. Big issue in the truck space as well. And as we sort of things learned en route to looking up other things, or designed en route to designing other things, was how do we help solve the charging gap? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. What does that gap look like? But came up with this product, which is called the Power Cube. And think of it as something that's the size of a sea container or so, and very carefully engineered, filled with batteries, that actually we can drop anywhere. We can, and it's self-driving. Once it's trucked somewhere, it can then, through a remote control, be positioned in the right arena. So anywhere from, for example, at an industrial depot where they haven't yet put in their own chargers, to a military installation, to a FEMA disaster site, to a university that has students who don't have anywhere else to charge. So lots of interesting applications. When you think about how do you help solve the issues related to where am I going to charge in the truck arena, that's one of them. I'm going to play this, which is, I think, again, from the standpoint of seeing this product and these products in terms of how do customers react to them.
Welcome to Blue Arc EV Solution Showcase Ride and Drive event. We're so happy you're all here today, and we're thrilled for you to see this ecosystem up close and personal for the first time. The Blue Arc ecosystem that you experience today includes an industry-first, commercial-grade, purpose-built EV chassis, our EV delivery walk-in van, and a fully portable remote-controlled charging station we call the Power Cube. At the center of it all, Blue Arc promises to be part of a greener future for the people, for our customers, the drivers, and for future generations.
I was blown away. The finishes, even for where they're at in the process, the chassis, it's clean, it drives like it floats out there, you know? So I think these guys are on something.
All right, so that was enough of a shift commercial, but I think it's interesting to see it, only from the standpoint of, so how does the product drive, how does it look, and importantly, how do people react to it? That was one of those rare moments in Detroit when it wasn't snowing. It was in the fall, it was October of last year. And really from the vantage point of whenever you bring on a new product like this, particularly in a technology space that is truly in development, you learn a lot from a ride and drive like this in terms of what can you do better and understand in terms of how does your product compare to competitors. So great opportunity. Let's talk about opportunities and challenges in the EV space more broadly. We could probably put 5 more up here in terms of both opportunities and challenge, but I think these are 3 that are pretty hard to miss. On driving range, price, and charging infrastructure. In one way or another, we've talked about each one of these already, but let's put a slightly finer point. On the range side, it translates to something as simple as fear you're not going to have enough power to get there. And I talked about it in terms of my own personal driving. Certainly one of the things we hear most often from customers is that, is your product or anyone else's product going to meet our need? You're out driving around on a FedEx route, and to make sure that on that one charge you can actually get the job done. And companion with that, it's not just the truck itself, but once you load up a back of a commercial e-retailer van with all the product, there's a couple thousand pounds to deal with. And any additional weight or anything additional that's changing the experience of how the vehicle was built is going to impact how successful you're going to be in getting enough range, frankly, to get the job done. And if you think about the difference between trucks and cars, you get in your car, you drive somewhere, you park it, leave it, go to work or go shopping or do whatever you're doing, it doesn't go very far. In the truck space, that truck is not making money unless it's working. And the need to have that truck out there on the road a significant amount of time with, ideally, sure, you can go back and charge overnight, but there may be times you need to charge on an intermittent basis as well. How can you do that in an efficient way that isn't going to occupy too much time away from working on the road? I talked earlier about the truck that we're putting out there, 200-mile range, and which translates to about 45 miles per gallon equivalent. In the world right now of what are these trucks doing, that probably is right around the top of the line. I'm not suggesting others aren't going to be there, but it's important in terms of focus on what's driving development and it's really helping to address that range issue. This is probably too small to see, I realize, but then let's talk about another challenge, and that's price. So I'm going to highlight some topics here. In terms of going out and buying a gas, and we're going to pick on the commercial e-retailer walk-in van type product that's delivering product at your house day to day. In a gas or diesel version, that truck is probably going to cost around $55,000. As a EV, and this is kind of for illustration because it can vary a little bit, but it's going to be more like $140,000 and up. So huge difference, 2.5, 3 times the price maybe for that product. But there's other things involved. Over a 10-year period, you're going to have service, right, maintenance, and you're going to have fuel. And on the maintenance side, that's where EV and fuel, that's where EV wins out. Here on the maintenance side, over 10 years of operating that truck, it's about $150,000. On the gas side, and these are rough numbers, gas or diesel, about just over $200,000. On the EV front, you're looking at $30,000 on maintenance, so one-fifth the investment from a maintenance standpoint, and on a fuel side, so to speak, which means electricity, $30,000 versus over $200,000. So why is that from a maintenance standpoint? If you looked at the inside of opened up a truck and looked under the hood, or you looked underneath or opened up the hood on an EV vehicle, you'd see, first off, there's far fewer parts on an EV. There's no oil change. There's no transmission to deal with. There's far fewer types of things that are maintenance items that break down. Yes, there is occasional maintenance that's needed, and yes, there's the need to ensure the battery's operating properly. And then on the fuel side, so how do we get to that fuel? Nice comparison of thinking about yearly cost. So if you're looking at roughly $2,700 in electricity, assuming 30,000 miles of driving, versus numbers on gas and diesel that are roughly 5 or more than 6 times that. And so over the term of 10 years, and this requires obviously on the fleet side for people to think long term, not year to year. On long term over 10 years, it's cheaper for me to own an EV. That's easy to say, harder to, as a big fleet owner for UPS, for example, to say we're going to invest all this money today in buying an EV. So that's in terms of in the world of challenge, that's a challenge. Let's talk about charging, and again, a lot of text here. I'll highlight some things for you. On the supply and demand side, right now, if you were to electrify all of the trucks in the United States right now, essentially all of really most of transportation, it would be another 40% requirement of what the grid currently has today. So that's a challenge. In terms of right now, there's 40% insufficient capacity if you were to electrify all the product that's out there. And you've got an infrastructure that's aging. So you need that investment to drive and help create that capacity to solve that problem. On production side, big issue there in terms of the battery front. You might have seen articles from time to time about what's going on in batteries related to electric vehicles. For example, fires related to electric vehicle batteries. Today, in most cases, it's a lithium-ion battery. And I'm not going to pretend I'm an engineer. I'm not. So I can't tell you almost anything about lithium-ion batteries, other than I can say it. But if you think about the challenge there in terms of the capacity to manufacture a sufficient number of lithium-ion batteries. Along with that comes cost, comes an impact on the carbon footprint, and comes really a technology challenge of, is this battery going to meet the needs of electric vehicles going forward? How do you solve that? You look at alternatives in terms of chemistry of the battery, and those are currently both in production and under consideration. So that helps to solve some of the production side with the battery. Charging requirements, lots of issues there, and if I was to draw one comment for you, it's the cost. To put in a charging station, and whether it's for those walk-in vans that deliver a commercial e-retailer product, or for large class 7 and 8 trucks that are really on the highway, if those were electrified, that investment can run anywhere from about $20,000 to $150,000 per charging unit. So again, big impact in terms of total cost of ownership. And on top of that, despite, for example, California mandating the number of vehicles that have to be electrified going forward, to secure the ability to actually put in a charging unit requires you work with the local utility. Local utilities are obviously under lots of burden in terms of demand, and that wait could be anywhere from 12 months and up. So it's the challenge of how do you address the charging issue. Hard to talk about this without talking about government funding and the impact that that's having. So whether it's on the Infrastructure Act, which came out over the past year, which created, depending upon the type of vehicle, anywhere from $7,500 to $40,000 incentive from the government to go out and buy an electric vehicle, or you're talking about the Jobs Act, which did the same thing but from a charging standpoint, and created an investment of about $30,000 from the government for the right kind of charger. So huge investment there from the government of helping to really sort of jumpstart the whole sort of initiative and the interest in electrification. I want to go back for a moment and just, this is a short, if you think about what the Power Cube was. And so what's the big deal? I think from this short video you see what the big deal is. Pretty exciting product. If you think about the challenge of the things we talked about of $20,000 to $120,000 of putting in charging capacity and having the ability to, for example, have a product like this with the kinds of applications you saw in the video, could literally appear in all sorts of different places. interest in this product. Every time I've talked to people about it, it seems like we stumble on a new application. You're starting to see things like this. You saw the term microgrid. You're starting to see other products like this in the marketplace. It really creates a huge opportunity. It's an expensive product, at least currently, but in terms of as we look forward and the industry looks forward, it's this kind of sort of innovative approach to charging that's going to help address some of these current gaps. So what's happening in the future of the fleet? What's interesting is it's 2023. If you went back to about the late 19th century, you'd actually see electrified vehicles for the first time. If you went to about 1900, you'd see 1/3 of vehicles on the road at the time were electric vehicles. By 1930, they were gone because of the Model T and the Ford obviously pioneering the application of the industrial combustion engine in that kind of setting, and gas prices. So here we are 100 years after they were gone, an opportunity of EVs coming back, which is pretty amazing from that standpoint. What will happen in terms of, in our world, different vehicle classes, different applications, clearly taking part in a market that is only growing exponentially. There is one product I'll show you just from the standpoint of you think about, well, it sounds like it's only for trucks that have flatbeds that haul or deliver packages. And the reality is it's used in lots of different applications, including this one.
When it comes to a greener, cleaner future, you're in it for the long haul. And so is Blue Arc. Their innovative all-electric truck solutions are changing the way crews work, so you can charge ahead as never before. Complete and road-ready, Schiff's proprietary Blue Arc Class 5 all-electric crew cab is in a class all by itself. With a range of 200 miles, it's designed to go the distance. The Class 5 work truck is well ahead of regulations and expectations on the job. Our 800-volt batteries use level 2 and DC fast charging technology. It features our breakthrough all-electric Class 5 EV chassis and a commercial-grade E-axle with a lightweight aluminum truck body. And our game-changing crew cab design is purpose-built for hard-working jobs and highly flexible applications. Each cab features weather-protected steps for curbside entrance and exit, providing safer ease of entry whenever you need it. And the Class 5 crew cab isn't just a ride to the next site. It's where work happens.
So I'm going to skip to the end. And I show that only from the standpoint of that the application of product right now is really touching every vehicle area. And as you think about innovating, and we think about innovating, and the industry more importantly thinks about innovating, it's fairly limitless. The growth is picking up at a pace where, while today, as we talk, there's a relatively small presence in actual electrification in trucks that are on the road, it is unmistakable that the whole world of what's acceptable in terms of product has changed. And so it's really a fascinating business. I can't thank you enough for listening. We took the products last year to Washington and spent 2 days talking to Senate staffs and senators and members of the House and the lead sustainability officer for the Pentagon, lead purchasing for FEMA, as well as a few other agencies. And one of the real themes that comes from this is I come back to one of my earliest comments, and that's about sustainability. And it's about the power of electrification really to change the footprint in terms of the carbon footprint, to really create a greener, more environmentally friendly tomorrow. Along the way, there will be, I'm guarantee you there's going to be some mistakes in terms of product that works better than others, but it really is a game changer in terms of having an impact on the environment and really transportation. So with that, I'd welcome any questions. I can't promise you I got all the answers, but thank you. Yeah, it's a great question. So we've announced we're producing in Charlotte, Michigan. We're actually not far from Lansing, the capital of Michigan, where we currently have a facility we've been doing business in for many years, manufacturing walk-in van and other product, but we're starting there. In terms of volume, it's really interesting when you could look at volumes, and I could have quoted some volumes that you maybe saw on the screen there of, for example, Rivian selling 100,000 vans, others, or trucks, others selling 50,000. We're being very conservative. As I mentioned, we have a committed order of 2,000. Our intent is to start appropriately, get great product on the road, and grow really aggressively from there.
I was just wondering if you had a specific volume target for that plant to begin.
No, not a specific target, but certainly you want to build to orders, and there is, I can tell you, the amount of market interest is pretty phenomenal. We spend a lot of time talking to dealers around the country, and every dealer who's in this space, and it's not the same dealer who you're buying your last passenger car from, but a number of really significant dealers in the commercial truck space, and every one of them obviously sees the need and the opportunity to be in the EV space. Yep.
It seemed like at one time in the electric vehicle arena, there was another alternative, and I was just wondering why that wasn't chosen, and that was to have places where, just like now, where if you're running out of gas, you pull off to the gas station and fill up. But that the electric, it takes a little longer, obviously, so that there would be batteries, and that instead of gearing up to charge as quickly as you can, there would be a quick, just like you have in your electric power tools and what have you, quick, take it off, put a new one in, and you're on your way again. And I was wondering, do you know what the trade-off was there and why that model was not chosen?
Yeah, the short answer is that I really don't know. It's really, because when you think about battery swapping, which conceptually sounds really great until you actually see these vehicles, mm-hmm. and you see the complexity of what does a set of batteries look like connected to a vehicle. It's not as simple as one unplug, one plug in, typically. But it would seem, certainly, I imagine, in the world of possible solutions, that would be out there. I think the real focus is, when you think about charging, and how do you accelerate charging? And when we first brought the Blue Arc out as I said, presented to the market, it was about 2 to 6 hours charging, depending upon the kind of charger you're using, the kind of battery, and other conditions. I think you're seeing now the potential for even more accelerated charging. It's how many kilowatts can you ramp up your charging device to, and that is in an area where it's hard to, so when you think about sort of computing power and how fast computing power changes. I think it's fair to say over the next 5 years, the amount of technological change in the battery space will continue to be pretty impressive. I spend a fair amount of time with battery manufacturers and seeing what they're doing and the level of technology change in their space and how quickly that's occurring says that whatever our expectations are now, it's clear they're going to continue to change and get faster. But I don't have a perfect answer for your swapping question. I think it's a great question. Yeah.
So to qualify for these tax incentives, there's a certain domestic sourcing and production requirement in there. So has that changed how you guys are approaching sourcing and producing these vehicles, or kind of were you already meeting those requirements?
Yeah. So it's interesting from the vantage point when the administration came out with, and we'll pick on infrastructure charging, an absolute Buy America demand requirement that has since been loosened up at least for initial period on the premise that no one really could meet those. And so I think you're seeing some loosening in terms of initially on the biometric requirement, sort of a phase-in period. On the shift side, we are, and I think I should have mentioned this and made it more clear. It's interesting, we are really a U.S. company. All of our facilities, except for a very small presence not related to this area in the United States, very strong reliance on U.S.-based sourcing, certainly have an international supply chain, but a probably disproportionate in terms of U.S. supply chain. And as we think towards going forward, it's something that we definitely is top of mind. And that's how do you make sure that it's not us who are getting the benefit of that incentive, it's our customer. And for the customer to get the benefit of that in terms of when they buy that over 14,000 pound truck, that they get the 40,000, potentially 40,000, or less than that and get 7,500, there has to be that component, there will be that component of that Buy America content. So it is anyone who's in this space, it is definitely something that you're factoring into your supply chain today.
I'm really concerned. I agree with you that EVs are the cars of the future.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of concerning things about it. First of all, the batteries are very expensive if you have to replace your battery in your car. That big component is a huge cost.
Right.
And another thing, I read an article not too long ago about the fact that you probably can speak to this. Cold weather, like you have in Michigan, really limits the range of your battery, and really that's causing a problem. And another issue is that my friends that live in Florida said during the hurricane, when the EV cars caught on fire, it took many times
Right.
the water to put one out. It was very, very difficult. So is there areas, are
Yeah.
these areas they're doing research to?
Yeah, they're all great areas. I mean, it's cost, weather, and safety, right? Which you touched on, all really tremendously important points in the battery space. And on the cost side, I'd agree. Battery prices, while largely are coming down, they're still extremely expensive. If you think about how long does that battery last? Our warranty today is 6 years, 175,000 miles, 180,000 miles. So they're, in terms of use, the expected use of a truck is ideally, they're built for 10, 15 years, depending upon, they get pretty rugged use. So that is something to think about in terms of cost and cost of replacement. On the weather side, right now, while there's a lot of research going on, there's no question, if you think about battery degradation and battery utility in terms of use, lots of things are going to impact that. How do you drive? What's the road like? What's the weather? How much is the battery discharge? Because as a battery discharges, it becomes less efficient. So it gets lower to that end of its charge. It's not going to be as efficient in terms of how it's operating as it was when it was fully charged. Weather side, no question, cold weather batteries are still not as efficient. And is there research going on? There's a lot of research. On the safety side, I saw an article recently in terms of the same circumstance you're referring to. This was not in Florida. This was just a fire involving an EV passenger car that took more than 10,000 gallons of water. Compare that to a non-battery car fire of less than 1,000 gallons. That's a pretty significant on the safety side. You have what's called this runaway sort of circuit or runaway fire. One of the things that it is when you think about direct change is the movement from lithium ion to lithium phosphate at what's called an LFP battery. So certainly real opportunity for continued change, improvement, and safety, and very much ongoing. But I think within the industry, whether it's passenger, whether it's commercial truck, safety is a huge focus.
Could I ask, so could you build in little solar cells on the top of the vehicle? So
Yeah, It's a great comment, and I wish I would have shown you a picture. There actually is a solar cell on top of the walk-in van, which is, think of that as sort of secondary accessory power. So that could help, for example, run secondary sources on the vehicle that use electrical power, like a radio, like the HVAC, but to actually power the vehicle itself, to my understanding, currently, there's not enough solar energy you can derive, or that we can derive from that. Could technology get there? That would be fantastic. Yeah. Yes?
I was just wondering, you've mentioned a number of different batteries. I'm just curious what the lifespan of them are. When do you have to change them?
Yeah, so and we've certainly worked with the battery manufacturers to understand that. I would tell you it's certainly continued to be under development, but right now, the warranty on the battery in the truck you were looking at is 6 years, and it's 175, 180,000. Will it perform beyond that? It will, but in terms of warranty, that's the current warranty. I go to the back, I'll come to you.
Is this a publicly traded company?
Yeah, Shift is publicly traded on the NASDAQ, and under the symbol SHYF.
SHYF, okay.
Okay.
I think we have time for one more.
This is a little bit to do with the battery question again.
Yeah.
But how do you see the battery life impacting resale and residual values, especially if people are leasing these vehicles? I would think it would have a lower residual value if it comes back kind of after 6 years with a older battery.
Yeah, no question. That's a concern. There's really interesting conversations in terms of, for example, leasing separate transactions between the battery and the vehicle itself. So you could have two different economic transactions, lease the battery, own the vehicle, obviously then lease a new battery. So there's really creative solutions that are being put into place for exactly the kind of concern that you're raising. Okay? Former Michigander.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to speak louder. Oh, here comes the mic. So this might be outside your realm of expertise, but I had heard about using electric trains and the dynamic power of going on the tracks, all the energy that's doing could be used to re-electrify the trains.
Mm-hmm.
So you wouldn't have to worry about plugging in. The trains would be charging themselves as they're creating power on the tracks. And if you had any insight on that.
I definitely don't. There's an interesting concept that I should have mentioned in terms of regenerative braking. And if you think about one of the elements, and it's maybe a tangential related to what you're talking about in the train space, but if you think of regenerative braking with e-vehicles, is you take your foot off the pedal and you're braking, and it's regenerating power. So it's a really important component of sort of battery technology and what has really helped, I think, give the kind of capacity for mileage, for range,